Howdy gamers, in this video I'm going to be talking about why to run the runes that are good for Vladimir. What the runes really offer him is either damage or utility, and for Vladimir, utility is usually going to beat that. Vladimir is a champion that really can't do anything early, even if you were to run early game runes. Let's say like poke runes like Airy and Arcane Comet. Even if you had these, you're not going to be able to win laning phases that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. There's just not enough in Vladimir's kit, and you gain so much more value through enduring the early game and then spiking not even that far into the mid game. And then into the late game, that's when Vladimir really comes online. So your best bet is to get either utility or burst out of the runes. And really the only ways to do that is through phase rush and electrocute. You could have other options. Maybe Unsealed Spellbook would come into play if things about the sorcery tree were heavily nerfed, because so much of what's offered in the sorcery tree is really good for Vladimir. You get movement speed, cooldown reduction, and ability power, all of that for free. A lot of this would have to be nerfed for something like Unsealed Spellbook to really come into play for Vladimir, because the rest of the inspiration tree is just not so useful for him, where you get smaller amounts of cooldown reduction, you get no ability power. All these things are more useful for like mana users and whatnot. That, and he doesn't need the extra laning tools, as you're either playing passive in lane or you're really just wave clearing anyways. The utility offered from the other summoner spells too isn't really like other champions that have more base damages behind them and then also don't rely on extra scaling make better use of Unsealed Spellbook, where they are completely spiking in the mid game. And then in the late game, they're still carried. So that's usually control mages. Vladimir is more of a like hyper carry in a sense, and should be played as such, as if you're playing Vladimir as a support for your team, it really becomes awkward. Maybe if the champion was truly overpowered, that would be the best way to play him. But as it currently stands, I don't think that's just where he's at in terms of his itemization. And as a champion, I don't think that's too crazy to say. I think that, again, his best keystones being Electrocute and Phase Rush. I think that Phase Rush is your best bet, whether it's mid or top lane. With Electrocute, it has its unique use cases. With Electrocute, you have more burst damage onto one target. Hitting an enemy champion with 3 separate attacks or abilities within 3 seconds deals bonus damage, and then this is on a 20-second cooldown. So it's basically only up once during a fight. In the laning phase, it's going to let you have more lethals than you otherwise would early game, but that's really not that important in a lot of cases. It's really good at lower MMRs because it's just simply easier to use. To gain value out of the utility, you have to be a higher rated player just inevitably. So having more damage, and then also with running Electrocute, you end up with the domination tree. So you get access to effectively more HP because you have Taste of Blood and Ravenous Center. Taste of Blood healing you for damaging the enemy, and then that's on a 20-second cooldown as well. Ravenous Hunter healing you for a percentage of damage dealt with your abilities. So not a terrible rune. And you can also get Eyeball Collection, which is going to give you ability power for getting kills and assist. You could also run Ghost Poro, giving you ability power for placing wards, but Eyeball Collection is just more generally in line with the domination tree in general. So this tree is not bad, and this tree is definitely easier to use for newer players because it simply is just run into the enemy and you've dealt more damage for doing the exact same things that you otherwise would do. You auto attack EQ, it's going to be an Electrocute proc. You EQ ult, and then your next Q is going to be an Electrocute proc, and then that in combination with Ignite is simply going to let you kill champions at at earlier stages of the game than you otherwise would be able to. But against lanes that more so against champions that have any sort of tankiness, so basically any tanks or even bruiser champions, Electrocute becomes almost entirely useless along with the rest of the domination tree, because if the enemy has any sort of healing, damage reduction, or resistances, shielding, etc., the Electrocute proc isn't going to really be that meaningful. Getting more rotations of your basic abilities off in your E and Q is where you're going to be able to get more damage against those champions, because they're going to be surviving anyways. So only against squishy champions is Electrocute viable. So at lower MMRs against squishier lane opponents, Electrocute is fine. You could also look to run Electrocute regardless of the MMR if you find yourself in a position where you've picked Vladimir but the enemy has picked multiple tanks, and then also in combination with your team comp, you would end up in a situation in which like Vladimir's entire job in the team comp would be to kill one champion, probably being the ADC. So if that's the case, Electrocute's also fine, but I think that your best bet is Phase Rush because of the utility that's offered and because everything else in the sorcery tree is just so valuable. So with Phase Rush, hitting an enemy champion with 3 separate attacks or abilities within 4 seconds grants you bonus movement speed and 75% slow resist. The movement speed increase is more for melee champions, but not so bad for ranged champions. And then the duration is 3 seconds, and the cooldown's only 15 seconds. The utility offered in Phase Rush is the movement speed, and the movement speed is getting Vladimir more damage in almost every single case, because once you're at one item, you're probably at around 30% CDR because of the runes, and then with that, if you're in range of the enemy, you can cast another Q or hit them with another E. If you're not, then you can't and you won't. So especially when you're playing against better players and they're going to be kiting, the extra movement speed is almost required to be in range of them. Even though Vladimir is fast and even though Vladimir gets a movement speed boost from his passive, the movement speed offered from Phase Rush, once you've initiated a fight basically, is going to help you stay on the target and finish them off with a second rotation of your basic abilities. If you're using it defensively too, it's really, really good because in the early game, it's going to help you avoid ganks. Even if you're really, really far up the lane and the enemy jungler ganks you, so long that you EQ and pull, you're going to get movement speed just to walk backwards and then gank avoided. Congratulations. So there's a lot of offensive utility. There's a lot of defensive utility. Whenever things are even, the Phase Rush can be used just to dodge skill shots by moving back and forth. So the huge utility in it is obviously the movement speed gain, but that movement speed is going to be giving you damage in the long run because you're going to be in range of champions. And since Vladimir's abilities, one is single target and then one is a short range ability, you have to be able to stay on the targets to keep dealing damage to them. And that's so much of what Vladimir's kit is getting 2 or 3 rotations of his Q and E off in a fight to have maximum value. So with Phase Rush, it puts you in the sorcery tree. The second rune here, you have good options in Nullifying Orb or Nimbus Cloak. Nullifying Orb gives you a magic damage shield whenever you get below 30% HP. If you're into almost any magic damage matchup, nowadays I think Nullifying Orb's your best bet. With Nimbus Cloak, after you cast a summer spell, you gain a movement speed increase that lasts for 2.5 seconds and allows you to pass through units. And the movement speed increase is based on the cooldown of the summoner spell that you cast. This was really good before the changes to TP because it made your teleports more impactful. It still does, but now you get the movement speed increase with teleport anyways. You do lose out on having the movement speed increase whenever you cast a flash, but if you're playing into literally any magic damage at all, having the shield from Nullifying Orb is so valuable for Vladimir because you're just blocking damage and you're effectively having more HP than you otherwise would have. So I think if you're playing into Syndra, Vigar, Orianna, again, literally any magic damage at all, should look to run Nullifying Orb. But when you're playing into other champions, melee champions, or AD champions like Kled, Zed, Kiana, etc. in the mid lane, I think Nimbus Cloak is still completely fine. Whether you're running Ignite or Teleport, the utility in both of them is about the same as Phase Rush, where once you cast a summoner spell, you have the option to run someone down and stay on top of them, therefore dealing more damage, or run away from them, and then, or even reposition just briefly and then attack them again when you're at a better position in the lane or in a fight. For the third rune, your best bet is always going to be Transcendence. Again, so much of what Vladimir is looking to do is spike really hard in the mid and late game, and you do that in the mid game by having Transcendence in combination with Cosmic Insight and the cooldown reduction shard. These three together gives you about 20% CDR coming into the mid game. So if you're sitting on one cooldown reduction item in probably Proto Bell and then you have blue buff, you have 40% CDR with one item. And that's so insane for Vladimir because all you're doing is spamming QE. And if you have that cooldown reduction earlier, whenever you take an all in, you can simply just dish out more damage than you otherwise would be able to a lot sooner in the game than most players are expecting. And to outweigh this cooldown reduction offered from Transcendence with, let's say, a little bit of movement speed from Celerity, not even close, and then the ability power from Absolute Focus, You could have more damage on your burst with absolute focus, but it's really not that much. You're going to be getting more damage almost always through the cooldown reduction offered from Transcendence for Vladimir. So it's your best bet and what you should always be looking to go. With Transcendence, you gain 10% cooldown reduction whenever you reach level 10, and whenever you exceed the cooldown reduction cap, you also gain ability power for that. So even if your build ends up giving you more cooldown reduction, or whenever you're getting blue buffs late game, that can be converted into ability power too, and then that's just more damage as well. So it's really, really an overpowered rune for Vladimir, basically. For the 4th rune, it's going to be Gathering Storm, obviously. Something like Scorch, again, same reason you're not running Airy. Even if you had this extra damage on your abilities early, it's not going to compound into anything meaningful in the laning phase, and it's not going to save you from losing lanes either. Water Walking isn't really good because you're not roaming as Vladimir that often. You're really just laning and team fighting. With Gathering Storm, every 10 minutes, you gain bonus ability power. And with Vladimir, you don't care if the game goes like 120 minutes, like you're still going to be scaling. So the ability power offered just continues to be more and more useful. Even if you're sitting on the 24 ability power offered in the mid game at 20 minutes, that's still completely fine because you're going to be sitting on like a Proto Belt, maybe a Zanya's, or maybe a Death Cap, and then that 24 ability power is just an amp tome for free. And then any time past that, it becomes just multiplicative. It becomes better. It becomes better. Don't worry about the language. Okay. With the secondary runes, I think that your best bet is going to be Inspiration, simply because of Cosmic Insight, giving you the cooldown reduction. But with Inspiration as well, you also have the good choice of Magical Footwear and Perfect Timing. With Magical Footwear, you save 300 gold on boots. You also get more movement speed from the boots. Since Vladimir doesn't want to be buying boots early, it's completely fine to run Magical Footwear. And then saving that gold, usually since you're a weaker champion early, you're going to be losing out on the laning phase. You might not go down 300 gold, but you might be down 150 gold or so to your lane opponent. And even with that, if you're down that 150 gold, at 12 minutes, you're making that up with Magical Footwear. And even if your lane opponent roams and gets a kill, you're making that up with Magical Footwear. Even if your lane opponent has, let's say, a CS lead and 1 turret plate on you, you're making that up with Magical Footwear because of the gold save. So it's a really, really solid rune. If you're playing into champions that engage onto you, again, champions like Kled, Kiana, Irelia, etc., Perfect Timing's fine, as it gives you a stopwatch at 14 minutes. At 14 minutes at the latest. If you get a kill or assist, it reduces that by 2 minutes. So with the one-time stopwatch, you're going to have it a lot earlier in the game since you're getting it from runes and you don't have to purchase it, and then that's going to help you in one skirmish, one team fight, etc., and can help offset a lot of your early weakness through the playmaking potential that you can have with the stopwatch, because you could play fights more aggressively or turn them in a defensive manner whenever the enemy's overdiving onto you and your team, because you can become invulnerable. So against champions that dive especially, really consider running stopwatch, but a good default is Magical Footwear. I don't think that anything in the other trees is really that valuable, because you're saving 300 gold with Magical Footwear, and then you're getting 5% cooldown reduction on your abilities, summoner spells, and items for Vladimir. Vladimir uses all of that really well, whether you're using it for the flash and teleport cooldown, whether you're using it for the Proto Belt and Zanya's cooldown, or the cooldown on your Q and E and the W and R. It's just all so good for him. And to have like a defensive option, like let's say Bone Plating and Revitalize, this could be okay into, again, the champions that dive onto you, champions like Kled and Irelia, but it's not going to save you from them. Just how Vladimir's kit plays out, even if those champions get on you and you have Bone Plating and Revitalize, it's not going to do enough. These are minor runes. They're not really providing that much for you in terms of an all-in against champions that have to dive onto you. So you're better just playing the lane passive against them than trying to fix your like over-aggressive player like missteps with the defensive runes and Resolve. With Domination second, you have okay options in Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, what you would run with the Electrocute page. But to run these secondary, it takes so much longer for Ravenous Hunter to be relevant than it does for Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight. And since you're already scaling on Vladimir through your itemization and just through the champion's kit, you don't need the extra scaling with like your runes in terms of Ravenous Hunter, because yes, Ravenous Hunter would just be better at like an 80-minute game time scenario in which you have Ravenous Hunter fully stacked up, because you also have to be getting unique kills and assists to have the Bounty Hunter stacks stacked up for Ravenous Hunter. So you have to stack this up. That's hard. And then by the time it is stacked up, you have to take damage for Ravenous Hunter to be useful. At the end of the, like near the late game, Vladimir really just becomes about his burst. It's really not so much about his healing. So, and you're going to be surviving anyway because of Zanya's most of the time. So to trade all of your mid-game spike off by not having Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight for a little bit of healing in lane and then a little bit of healing mid to late game with Ravenous Hunter in team fights is such a bad exchange in my opinion, because again, Vladimir's scaling anyways. Everything in the precision tree is kind of insanely low value. You don't need the percentage damage increases from Coup de Grace or Last Stand for Vladimir. You're killing champions anyways. You're best off getting your damage through your cooldowns and then also through your itemization. And then something like Triumph is just also not needed. Bruiser champions just use these runes way better than Vladimir could. There might be niche cases in which these are good secondary, but I don't know those as I don't main Vladimir, but they're not terrible. They're definitely better than Domination. But again, I think the economic battle with Cosmic Insight and Magical Footwear is your best bet for Vladimir. For the Shards, obviously, I think the cooldown reduction Shard is going to be your best bet. The same reason with Transcendence over Absolute Focus instead of the Adaptive Force over the cooldown reduction Shard. Since Vladimir is a champion that relies so much on his Q and E in the mid game, and since you start the game with the runes, like let's say you start the game with 9 extra ability power, that doesn't do anything in the laning phase. It really, really doesn't. It might if you're running Electrocute, but if you're running Phase Rush and where you're playing to scale, the cooldown reduction Shard is always going to be beating that 9 ability power in the early game, because this goes hand in hand with your scaling since it's cooldown reduction based on your level. So it's your best bet for Vladimir. Same reason, more basic abilities equals more damage. For the other runes, I think you could go Adaptive Force and then Resistance based on your matchup. If you have a really, really tough matchup, I think running double Resistances could be okay. So if you're playing against like let's say a Syndra, running double Magic Resist would be alright. It wouldn't be super good, but it'd be okay. You could also run 1 Magic Resist and 1 Scaling Health. Just given the nature of how Vladimir works, but generally I would just run Adaptive Force and then Armor or Magic Resist depending on the matchup that you have. So that's mostly my thoughts on Vladimir runes. Again, a recap is that Electrocute is okay for lowering MMRs, and then also whenever Vladimir's entire job is just purposed around bursting one target, and then if you're running Electrocute, I really like, if you're running Electrocute, I think you're playing for early, or like more so just for mid game anyway. So I think Inspiration would probably be best secondary, as you would still have the economic benefit of Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight, because Sorcery Tree is just completely scaling, and if you're running Electrocute, I don't think that's really your goal as Vladimir. So I think your best bet would just be Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight if you were running this. But if you're playing into even just Bruiser champions, Electrocute becomes very, very useless because the damage value offered is just not so meaningful, regardless of the lane being mid or top. But in every single matchup, Phase Rush is going to be really, really useful. If you're playing into an AP champion, you want to go Nullifying Orb, but if you're not, Nimbus Cloak is your best bet. And then it's always going to be Transcendence and Gathering Storm for the scaling. And then the rest of the runes is really just a lot of scaling. So with these runes, they offer Vladimir movement speed and Phase Rush and Nimbus Cloak, and Magical Footwear. The utility for movement speed with Vladimir is very, very high value, given the nature of his kit, where he's short range and needs to be in range to damage enemy champions. You get a lot of cooldown reduction through Transcendence, Cosmic Insight, and the cooldown reduction Shard. It's a little over 20% for free, which is so crazy to get from runes. And then you get a little bit of ability power with Gathering Storm and then the Adaptive Force Shard. So that's really your best bet with what you can get from runes with Vladimir, because the utility is just at such a high value for him that all the other damage runes become almost irrelevant. So That's my thoughts on Vladimir runes. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I try to answer most of them. If this video helped you, leaving a like on the video helps me. You can also subscribe. It's just League of Legends content. Soon, it will be more than just rune videos. And yeah, twitch.tv/SorryNelson. Check it out, or don't. I really don't care, but make sure to subscribe, man. Alrighty, peace out. Love Vladimir. Love when Vladimir flashes on my ADC and he just instantly dies in the W. I love that part. Great champion, great design. Nothing wrong with it at all. Weak laning phase. Oh, I got weak laning phase. When has my solo queue laner ever beat a Vladimir? Like, ever? I don't get it, man. Great champion, though. Love phase rush. Love when he moves at the speed of light and kills my entire team. Love that part, man. Keep playing Vladimir.